Hey guys, tonight we travel back to a place where the Aegean Sea glimmers like polished silver and the scent of salt hangs heavy in the air. You stand on the edge of Halicarnassus, a coastal city where stone walls stretch wide and tall, fishermen mend their nets with tired hands, and merchants cry out prices for figs, olives, and wines that glisten like rubies in the sun. The gulls circle above, their cries sharp, their wings slicing through the sky. You take a breath, and it tastes of sea foam, spice, and adventure. This is the beginning of our journey into one of history's most hauntingly beautiful creations, the Mausoleum at Halicarnassus. But fair warning, if you somehow got dropped in this world without sunscreen, sandals, or a sturdy coin purse, you probably wouldn't survive more than a day. History may be enchanting, but it's not exactly ergonomic. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And, as always, drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is there. I love seeing the little constellation of listeners across the globe. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You walk past the harbor, where sleek wooden triremes bob gently against the docks, their sails furled, their oars resting like folded wings. This harbor is the lifeblood of Halicarnassus, drawing traders from Egypt, from the Greek Isles, from the far reaches of Anatolia. The city hums with the languages of strangers, the bartering of goods, and the laughter of sailors who may or may not remember where they parked their ships. Halicarnassus, in this moment, is already an impressive city. Stone fortifications rise, paved streets cut through neighborhoods, and the theater fills with voices echoing into the night. Yet the greatest work of all still waits to be imagined. For now, you are surrounded by a living city, the hum of its heart carried by the salty wind. Fact: Halicarnassus truly was a thriving coastal city of Caria in the 4th century BCE. Known for its strategic harbor and impressive fortifications. It wasn't just some sleepy fishing village. It was an ambitious place, a crossroad between empires. You wander into the agora, the open market, where vendors boast of fabrics dyed purple with snail shells. A luxury so costly, you wonder if anyone ever accidentally ate one and invented a very expensive snack. A spice merchant waves you over, offering a pouch of cinnamon. Straight from the east, he promises, though you strongly suspect his cousin has been picking it out of the nearby hills. That's the thing about bustling cities. Half the fun is figuring out which salesman is lying to you the most gracefully. Quirky tidbit. According to some ancient writers, locals in Halicarnassus were considered both Greeks and not quite Greeks, a hybrid identity that baffled outsiders. Imagine having tourists ask if you're Greek enough while you're just trying to eat your lunch. The streets are alive with contrast. Noble houses with marble courtyards stand near the humbler dwellings of fishermen. Children chase each other between columns, their laughter blending with the clatter of donkey hooves. Somewhere nearby, a priest leads a small procession, incense curling upward as chants call softly to forgotten gods. The city breathes around you, a place already old and layered, yet still restless for more. Historians still argue whether Halicarnassus in this period leaned more toward being a Carian stronghold influenced by Persian power, or a Greek-flavored city-state with heavy local traditions stitched inside its walls. What seems certain is that this was no backwater. It was a jewel gleaming under the Mediterranean sun, ready to give rise to something the world would never forget. You continue down toward the water, where the waves slap lazily against stone quays. Fishermen haul in their catches, wriggling silver fish, nets bursting with scales. A boy slips, almost dropping a basket, and an older man scolds him while suppressing a laugh. The moment is small, fleeting, yet it feels eternal, the kind of ordinary life that builds the foundation of cities and civilizations. And in the background, looming faintly on the horizon of imagination, there is already talk of rulers, of satraps and dynasties, of how stone might rise not just for the living, but to honor the dead in ways never before seen. For now, though, you walk with the city, listening to its pulse, watching its people, catching glimpses of what greatness may come. You catch a final glance of the harbor at sunset, the sky bleeding orange and purple, gulls soaring like drifting sparks. Somewhere behind you, a poet raises his voice in a tavern, weaving verses about glory and gods, though half the patrons are too busy spilling wine on their sandals to notice. The night stretches ahead, heavy with promise. This city holds secrets you are only beginning to feel. You drift from the busy harbor streets into a quieter quarter of the city, where villas and shaded courtyards hint at wealth and ambition. Here, in the heart of Halicarnassus, the story turns toward one man, Mausolus, the satrap of Caria. You walk as though following the whisper of his presence, each step leading deeper into the shadow of his legacy. Mausolus is not just another provincial governor. He's a man of vision and appetite, both political and aesthetic. He rules Caria under the larger umbrella of the Persian Empire, yet he styles himself with Greek flourishes, commissioning temples, fortifications, and theaters. You hear locals debating in hushed tones, is he a Persian satrap or a Greek prince, as though one man could straddle two worlds. Fact, Mausolus reigned as satrap of Caria from 377 to 353 BCE, and during his lifetime he shifted the capital to Halicarnassus, transforming the city into a gleaming showpiece of power and culture. You pause by a colonnade, where sunlight filters through marble columns. The stones are cool to the touch, whispering of the man who insisted his city shine as brightly as Athens or Ephesus. Mausolus is the kind of ruler who collects taxes with one hand and poetry with the other. He secures alliances, reorganizes the land, and fills his treasury, not just to fund armies, but to shape memory in stone. Some say he has a taste for the dramatic. After all, why build plain when you can build magnificent? You imagine him standing on a high terrace, gazing across the harbor, calculating how towers should rise, how streets should align, and perhaps wondering how history will whisper his name. You can't help but smirk. If Mausolus were alive today, he'd probably have the world's flashiest LinkedIn profile. Quirky tidbit. Ancient gossip claimed Mausolus had an unusual fascination with his own family line, even marrying Artemisia II, his sister, which, let's just say, was less awkward back then than it sounds at your modern dinner table. Historians note it wasn't uncommon among ruling dynasties, but still, you can picture the family reunions being complicated. As you move through the city, you hear rumors in the marketplace. Mausolus is extending the walls again, one vendor says. He's taxing the villages to pave the streets, mutters another. Yet beneath the grumbles lies a thread of admiration. This satrap is building something that might last forever. Historians still argue whether Mausolus's vision was truly about personal glory, or whether he sincerely believed he was strengthening Caria against the pressures of empires looming east and west. Was he dreaming of immortality, or just trying to survive in the shifting chess game of Mediterranean power? You picture a banquet hall, its floors polished, its air heavy with incense and roasted lamb. Nobles recline on couches, raising cups of wine, while Mausolus sits at the center, calm, deliberate, weighing each word like coins. He listens more than he speaks, and when he finally does, people lean closer. He is both ruler and strategist, but also a man quietly aware that his time, like every man's, will someday run short. There's a joke whispered among servants. If the satrap asks for more marble, don't argue. He'll just tax you twice. You chuckle softly, imagining stone masons rolling their eyes even as they carve flawless blocks. It's easy to see how Mausolus's ambitions sometimes strained his people, yet his projects gave them work, identity, and a city that dazzled travelers. The streets of Halicarnassus widen before you. You catch sight of a temple crowned with white marble, gleaming like ice under the Mediterranean sun. Mausolus has drawn artisans from across Greece, Athens, Rhodes, even distant Ionia, to leave their fingerprints on his city. The hum of chisels and hammers is never far away, echoing like a heartbeat beneath the laughter of markets and the shuffle of sandals. As evening falls, you climb toward a high hill overlooking the sea. From here, the whole city spreads beneath you. The fortified walls, the winding alleys, the proud harbor full of ships, and beyond it all, the endless Aegean. You feel the same impulse Mausolus must have felt, that tug to make something enduring, something that declares, I was here. The sun dips low, painting the sky in crimson streaks. Somewhere, Mausolus himself reclines, perhaps gazing at this very horizon, already calculating how stone, marble, and memory will fuse into something greater than his reign. You sense it too, the inevitability of grandeur, the pull toward a creation that will not only house his remains but immortalize his name. The night deepens, lamps flicker in the streets, and the sea hums with its eternal rhythm. In this city of ambition, Mausolus's presence is everywhere, in the stones, in the plans, in the whispers. You can almost hear him, a faint echo across centuries shaping the destiny of Halicarnassus long before the first block of marble is raised. The night grows quieter as you move through narrow streets, the sound of sandals softened by dust. Somewhere in the distance, music drifts from a banquet hall, but here the air feels heavy, as if holding its breath. You turn a corner and see her, Artemisia, queen, sister, and wife of Mausolus. She walks through a torchlit colonnade, her robes sweeping like whispers against the stone, her face solemn yet luminous in the glow. You follow at a respectful distance, sensing that her story will entwine itself with his in ways no builder's chisel could ever separate. Fact: Artemisia, too, was both the sister and the wife of Mausolus, and when he died around 353 BCE, she inherited the throne, ruling Caria in her own right. She commissioned the construction of his tomb, the Mausoleum, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. In the palace, Artemisia pauses before a statue of Mausolus, her fingers brushing the marble cheek. Her grief is not loud or theatrical, it is quieter, more dangerous, the kind of grief that builds monuments. Where others see death as an ending, she sees it as an invitation to carve memory into stone, so vast the gods themselves might pause to admire it. You watch as she turns to her advisors. Her voice is calm, steady. She does not waver as she gives orders for architects and sculptors to be summoned from across the Greek world. This will not be just a tomb. It will be a beacon, a proclamation of devotion, and perhaps a warning to rivals. The ruler of Caria does not simply vanish into dust. Quirky tidbit. Later gossip claimed Artemisia's grief was so overwhelming that she mixed her husband's ashes with wine and drank them daily, a gesture both bizarre and strangely poetic. Was it true, or just a tale spun by storytellers who enjoyed a good shock? Hard to say, but you can almost picture bards competing to outdo each other with, "You'll never believe what the queen did next." Historians still argue whether Artemisia's motivations were purely about love or also about politics. Did she mourn as a widow or strategize as a ruler? Perhaps both. After all, grief and power often walk the same corridors. You trail her into a chamber where maps of the Aegean spread across a marble table. Advisors whisper of enemies, of tribute, of Persian overlords watching from afar. Yet Artemisia's gaze is steady, her hands folded before her. For this woman, love and leadership are fused into one path, to build a tomb so magnificent that neither Persians, Greeks, nor time itself could deny Mausolus's glory, or her own. She walks the palace gardens at dawn, the air thick with the perfume of lilies. Servants trail behind, but she seems lost in thought, perhaps already envisioning white marble blocks rising higher than the city's walls, sculpted lions standing guard, friezes alive with myth. For her, stone becomes a language, a way of speaking across centuries. You sense that this grief is not soft but sharp, not a collapse but a command. The people of Halicarnassus murmur stories of their queen. Some admire her devotion, others roll their eyes. If Mausolus had been half as generous alive, we'd have gold on every street corner. Yet even the skeptics lean closer when the topic of the tomb arises. They know something extraordinary is coming. A mason in the marketplace jokes, "If she keeps building like this, we'll run out of mountain." Another replies, "Then she'll build a mountain out of marble instead." You smile quietly. Even in jest, the truth lingers. Artemisia's plans will outgrow every expectation. You catch a final glimpse of her standing at the palace balcony, the Aegean shining like liquid silver behind her. She holds a scroll, perhaps the first sketches of the tomb, and her hair dances in the wind. The torches flicker, shadows lean across the stone, and you realize she has already begun. The tomb is not just an idea. It is alive, forming in her mind, ready to rise with every strike of hammer on marble. The city sleeps, but Artemisia does not. Her grief has become architecture, her love a blueprint for immortality. You can almost hear the chisels echo already. Morning arrives dressed in marble dust. You slip into the maze of workshops where mallets tap in patient rhythms, and the air smells faintly of wet clay, beeswax, and fresh-cut cedar. Lanterns hang from rafters, turning tiny swirls of stone powder into glitter, history's least washable accessory. You move between benches where artisans warm their hands over brazier coals, then bend to their models again, as if the night never ended and the day is just an extra candle on the same flame. At a long table, two men unroll papyrus plans that bristle with measurements and neat little inked notes. Names pass quietly from mouth to mouth: Satyrus, Pythias, architects whose geometry has the calm confidence of sailors who trust the stars. A wax tablet sits nearby with scratched calculations that look like someone argued with the numbers and then forgave them. The room holds its breath while they line up string and ruler, testing angles, checking alignments, nudging the vision into a shape that feels inevitable. Fact: ancient sources often credit the architects Satyrus and Pythias with designing the tomb, while four renowned sculptors, Scopas, Bryaxis, Leochares, and Timotheus, are traditionally said to have worked on its decoration. You drift to the sculptors' bays, each one a little kingdom of tools: chisels arrayed like silver reeds, mallets with worn-in handles, sharpening stones dark as rain. A young apprentice leans close to a clay maquette of a horse, coaxing muscle lines with a narrow spatula until the animal looks ready to exhale. Nearby, a master studies a marble block as if trying to hear the figure hidden inside. He knocks the stone lightly and listens. The sound rings pure. He nods, then chalks a slender guideline. The talk around you rides the tide of Greek and Carian words. Proportion, someone says, and the room turns as one to stare at a set of wooden calipers long as a forearm, traveling from model to stone. Another murmurs stability, pointing to a sketch that shows columns rising like a grove of disciplined trees around a central core. A third voice whispers light, and you look up to see the roof pitched in elegant steps designed to catch sun like a ladder for brightness. Even the space between plans and models feels tuned to music. Quirky tidbit: later writers passed along a story that each sculptor decorated a different side of the great monument as a sort of friendly contest, and that they supposedly judged one another's work when it was finished, an art competition where the prizes were bragging rights and immortality. Whether that actually happened or was just ancient workshop gossip with excellent PR value remains a curiosity. You edge closer to a relief in progress where a procession of figures, warriors and riders, musicians and attendants, emerges from marble in a slow dawn of detail. Fingers press fine abrasives against cheeks and eyelids to bring a gentle sheen. Someone jokes that noses are the first thing to chip and the last thing anyone forgives, and a chorus of rueful laughter follows. Nothing unites a studio like shared dread of a badly timed sneeze. An older carver taps his chisel with the careful rhythm of a lullaby, pausing now and then to sprinkle water over the stone so dust falls away in pale tears. On the architect's table, a wooden model shows the layers of the monument: a sturdy podium bound by steps, a colonnade rising in a bright ring, a frieze tying the rhythm together like a hymn carved in marble, and above, yes, an angled roof with a chariot poised at the summit. Fingers hover over it reverently. Someone nudges the model chariot forward a fraction of an inch and then back again, arguing that sailors in the harbor should glimpse it like a crown seen through sea spray. The room settles on the tiniest of adjustments with the gravity of judges in a cosmic trial. Historians still argue whether the mausoleum had exactly the number of columns and roof steps later authors claimed, or whether those figures were tidy storytelling after the fact rather than a contractor's ledger. Memory, it turns out, loves straight lines even when construction sites do not. You step into the yard where larger stones wait under awnings, their faces blocked out with charcoal. A foreman walks by carrying a string and plumb assemblage that could pass for a street performer's instrument. He stoops to a base course and measures twice, then again, as if the third time is where the truth hides. Across the way, apprentices melt beeswax to pour into small molds, miniature lions, horses, and human heads, testing poses before the marble hears the decision. There's a cheerful argument about whether a hero's cloak should swirl left or right. Someone quips that it depends on which way the wind of history is blowing. You can't tell if the joke is about the weather or politics, which is probably the point. Inside, Satyrus and Pythias debate the path of a staircase hidden within the thickness of a wall. Their voices remain calm, the kind of calm that grows from having been wrong before and surviving it. Lines of ink feather the papyrus where fingers brush too soon. They talk of how visitors will move, how the monument should orchestrate footsteps into a slow procession. First awe, then wonder, then the long-minded quiet of comprehension. You sense their attention is less about making people feel small and more about making them feel guided, as if the building is a host holding a lamp. A messenger arrives from the palace with a sealed note. The wax breaks. A short instruction is read aloud. No one groans. That alone tells you everything you need to know about the Queen's authority. Adjustments are made. A model column gains a fraction of girth. The stylobate rises by the span of a palm, and a corner frieze sketch swaps places with another to chase the light more gracefully. You smile when an apprentice mutters that client revisions are eternal, then blushes, realizing he just said that about a queen. The sculptors move like a tide through the room. Bryaxis, so they say, prefers faces with an inward gaze, eyes that seem to listen. Leochars lends figures an airy lift, like the wind is their second spine. Timotheus carries a tenderness into fabric, letting stone fall in soft folds. Scopus's figures hold attention at the corners of the mouth, a whispered storm. If those names are a rumor you ride rather than a certainty you stand on, the results are no less real in your bones. Work that makes marble feel like breath learning to speak. You pause at a rack of tools where a small tag identifies each chisel by width and bite. Someone has scratched a little fish beside one handle, the sort of private joke that only matters to the hand that reaches for it at dawn. Farther down, a jar collects broken iron points, the casualties of hard stone and harder deadlines. Another jar holds olive pits, proof that even genius breaks for snacks. The head mason notices your glance and shrugs. One jar feeds the work, the other proves it fought back. Outside again, you watch a crane of ropes and pulleys creak as men practice lifting a weight stone, rehearsing the choreography they'll need when the first great blocks rise. A foreman calls cadence, and their feet thump in unison across planks. The sound reminds you of oars beating the sea. This is a ship, you think, a ship sailing upward with gravity for an ocean and the sky for a destination. As the sun leans west, Artemisia herself appears at the threshold, quiet as a closing book. No trumpets, no heralds, only the soft shift of sandals and the sideways glance that ripples through the room when people recognize certainty walking. She studies the wooden model, traces a fingertip along the stepped roof, and pauses over the little chariot at the top. A sculptor lifts a cloth to reveal a hand-sized horse's head, its nostrils flared as if tasting salt air. She nods, a small approval that lands like cool water on hot stone. The room breathes again. When she departs, the plans remain, and the work resumes with the serene frenzy of true purpose. You stand at the doorway a moment longer, watching mallets kiss chisels, dust rise, and ideas become weight. The workshops hum like a hive, every bee certain of its task. The monument is still only drawings and whispers, and a tabletop mountain of wood, wax, and hope, but you feel it gathering mass the way clouds gather rain. The first storm of stone is coming, and when it falls, it will fall upward. The sound of chisels fades behind you as you climb toward the edge of a construction site that feels more like a battlefield of stone. The hill is scarred, leveled by patient labor, and carved into terraces where workers swarm like ants, each carrying tools, ropes, or baskets of rubble. Dust swirls in the sunlight, thick enough to sting your eyes, and the scent of sweat and fresh-cut marble lingers in the air. You stand on the threshold of something monumental. The foundation of the tomb is being laid. Fact: the Mausoleum at Halicarnassus stood on a massive podium, its base rising in stepped layers, combining elements of Greek, Egyptian, and Lycian design. The foundation was essential, engineered to bear the weight of dozens of marble columns and a towering roof. From where you stand, the ground trembles under hammer blows. Enormous blocks of local limestone are being dragged into position, creaking across wooden rollers greased with animal fat. Teams of men chant in rhythm, pulling ropes wound through primitive pulleys. A foreman beats time on a drum, his voice cutting through the chaos. "Steady, steady!" The block lurches forward, groaning like a beast reluctant to move. When it finally thuds into its trench, the earth itself seems to sigh. A gang of masons crouches nearby, smoothing the first courses of stone with plumb lines and chalk. One measures the gap between blocks with a sliver of bronze. Another sprinkles fine sand into seams so the joints lock tighter. You lean closer and notice the faint grid lines etched on the surface. Geometry burned into limestone, discipline engraved into rock. Quirky tidbit. Ancient sources suggest builders sometimes inserted thin sheets of lead between massive stone blocks to cushion the weight and absorb shock. Imagine discovering that your house foundation has built-in stress relief, a 4th century BCE version of yoga for architecture. As you circle the site, you hear the clang of iron on stone. Sparks jump briefly, lost in the dust. A crane of timber creaks as counterweights drop, lifting another block to join the growing wall. Men grunt, ropes strain, and suddenly the block hovers, suspended in midair like a reluctant cloud. A child watching from the ridge gasps, and one worker winks at her before guiding the stone into place with a shove of his shoulder. Historians still argue whether the foundation was perfectly square or slightly rectangular, and how closely the builders followed Satyrus and Pythias's original plan. The dimensions vary in the surviving records. Was it 120 by 100 feet or something larger? The truth might be buried under both time and rubble. You wander further, stepping carefully between trenches where rubble has been tamped down into dense layers, forming a platform. Here, the builders pour crushed stone mixed with clay, stamping it down with heavy rammers. The ground shakes with each strike, as if the earth itself is reluctantly giving permission to bear a wonder. A group of carpenters works nearby, fashioning scaffolding from tall cedar poles imported from Lebanon. They lash the timbers together with hemp ropes, clambering upward like acrobats. One drops a mallet, and it bounces once before thudding into the dirt. A laborer below mutters, "The gods don't like shortcuts," then ties his rope tighter. You smirk at the casual blend of superstition and common sense. It's the same logic that tells you not to step on a Lego barefoot. The queen herself appears at the edge of the site, her veil pulled back, her eyes steady. Artemisia watches silently as workers pause to bow, then continue. She doesn't shout commands. Her presence alone feels like gravity. The blocks move, the dust rises, and the foundation deepens under her gaze. It is as though grief itself has become an architect. A pause falls over the site at noon. Workers huddle in the shade, gnawing on olives and flatbread, sipping watered wine from clay jars. Someone tells a joke about how Mausolus is finally settling down, and laughter ripples, though it carries an edge. For a moment, grief loosens, replaced by camaraderie, before the drumbeat starts again and the site reawakens. From the top of the hill, you glimpse the early outline, a broad rectangle of stone, tier upon tier, ready to shoulder the monument's weight. It doesn't look like much yet, just a skeleton of walls, trenches, and dust, but you feel its power. The shape is already there, a ghost of grandeur etched into the bedrock. As the sun sets, the foundation glows golden, its shadows stretching long across the harbor. The workers pack their tools, their voices hoarse but proud. They know this is no ordinary building. This is a promise being carved into the earth, a pact between stone and memory. You can almost hear the monument rising already, even though tonight it is only the beginning. The foundation is no longer bare. When you return to the site, the dust has settled into order, and the skeleton of stone has begun to sprout upward like a marble forest. You walk along the edges of scaffolding where ropes creak, pulleys groan, and the steady thump of hammers beats like a heart. The monument is growing, and with it, the air feels charged, half worksite, half temple, half circus. Yes, that's 3 halves. Wonders tend to bend the math. Fact, the mausoleum rose in tiers above its foundation, with 36 columns surrounding the structure, each supporting a roofline richly decorated with sculptural friezes. Above these, a stepped pyramid roof carried a colossal chariot sculpture at its peak. You stand at the base of a column, newly raised, its fluted sides catching the afternoon sun like ripples frozen in stone. Workers climb scaffolds to chip the final grooves, each stroke of the chisel carving not just lines but rhythm. Dust drifts down, coating their hair until they look like ancient snowmen, serious snowmen with outstanding balance. Farther along, blocks of marble relief are being hauled into position. The images come alive, warriors locked in combat, horses rearing, gods striding forward with calm ferocity. The sculptors argue cheerfully about whether Zeus's beard looks too curly or not curly enough, while an apprentice mutters that at least nobody's criticizing his donkeys. A foreman shouts above the din, "Remember, even the gods prefer good posture." You can't help but laugh. Quirky tidbit. Some ancient accounts suggest there were statues of lions guarding the corners of the mausoleum's roof. Lions on rooftops. It's either a symbol of majesty or the world's least practical neighborhood watch program. Either way, you imagine them roaring silently across the city as moonlight touched their manes. You climb the scaffolding, gripping ropes slick with resin. From this height, the worksite looks like an anthill in fast forward. Teams haul stones on sledges, men chant as they lift beams, and sculptors polish panels with abrasive powder until they gleam like ice. The wind carries salt from the sea, mingling with the sharp tang of iron and sweat. Looking down, you feel dizzy. But then again, so must the workers, who pause only long enough to squint at the sun before resuming. Historians still argue whether the columns formed a complete peristyle around the tomb, or whether they were arranged only along certain sides. The descriptions left by ancient writers don't always agree, leaving scholars to puzzle over whether the monument looked more like a temple or more like a hybrid of palace and shrine. From the scaffolding, you glimpse the reliefs more closely. A procession of warriors seems frozen mid-step, their sandals aligned with uncanny precision. Muscles bulge in carved tension, spears thrust forward, and cloaks ripple as though a hidden wind sweeps through the stone. The sculptors have captured a moment that never moves but always seems about to. It is eerie, as if the marble itself remembers the battles and myths from which the figures are drawn. A sculptor nearby wipes his brow and sighs. "If I have to carve one more horse, I'll start neighing in my sleep." His apprentice smirks and says, "At least horses don't complain about your chiseling." The two share a laugh, the kind of humor that keeps weary hands moving long after daylight fades. Down below, Artemisia walks among the workers. She pauses at each stage, listening, nodding, sometimes laying a hand on unfinished stone. She says little, yet her presence steadies the sight. For her, every groove in a column, every fold in a sculpted robe is a syllable in the story she is writing for Mausolus. You sense that this is more than art. It is a kind of spell, cast in marble, meant to defy time itself. The columns rise higher each day. You imagine the future when sailors enter the harbor and see not just a city, but a mountain of gleaming stone crowned with chariots and lions. Already, Halicarnassus buzzes with pride. Merchants brag in the agora that their city houses a wonder. Poets draft verses dripping with flattery. Children carve little tombs out of clay and call them Mausolachia. As the sun sets, you stand at the foot of the growing structure. The columns glow orange, the reliefs cast long shadows, and the air thrums with possibility. You hear the rasp of stone against stone, the grunt of men pulling ropes, and the faint echo of chisels like distant rain. The mausoleum is no longer an idea. It is rising, bone by bone, muscle by muscle, into the sky. You leave the site under the first stars, glancing back once more. The scaffolding looks like a giant's ladder, climbing into the dark. You feel it in your chest. The wonder has begun to breathe. By the time you return, the monument no longer feels like scaffolds and sketches pretending to be a future. You ascend a timber ramp, palm against a rope rail, sticky with resin, and step into a hush that swallows the clatter from outside. The air cools, the light thins, and the new marble gives off a faint mineral scent, like rain in a cave. You move slowly because the space asks you to, each measured pace turning footsteps into ceremony. A corridor folds inward, proportioned to guide the gaze. The floor blocks have been rubbed with fine abrasives until they glow like moonlight, and the walls carry a soft, living sheen. Reliefs flank your path, a procession of attendants, laurel-wreathed musicians, figures leading sleek horses with patient hands. Even sound behaves differently here. Whispers travel as if the stone has been taught to carry secrets gently from ear to ear. Somewhere far above, a small opening funnels daylight down in a pale column, so clean it looks carved. If mood lighting had been invented already, they would have named it after this place. Fact: ancient writers described the mausoleum as a multi-tiered structure with a surrounding colonnade and a stepped roof, and tradition holds that Mausolus and Artemisia were laid to rest within its precincts after their deaths in the mid-4th century BCE. You pass under the ring of columns and into the interior precinct, a space that balances reverence with theater. Architects have folded distance and angle to create a feeling of approach, never abrupt, never casual. Your pace slows without your permission. A carved doorframe, still awaiting its bronze fittings, yawns ahead. A mason, crouched by the threshold, brushes away dust with the back of his wrist, as if tidying before a guest. He is, in a way. This chamber is meant to welcome the living while honoring those who have already taken the long, quiet road beyond the horizon. In the antechamber, the sculptor's touch turns narrative into atmosphere. Mythic scenes curl around the room. A goddess extending a hand over a city's ramparts, a hero standing between two fates, griffins gripping foliage that seems to rustle if you blink too long. A priest passes carrying a shallow bowl of oil, moving like a soft breeze in fabric. He pauses, dips a reed, and draws a tiny arc on the threshold, just enough to scent the air with resin and myrtle. The gesture is more choreography than spectacle, a reminder that the building is not only stone, it is ritual made visible. Quirky tidbit. Much later, lore claims there were clever vents or hidden channels inside great tombs to let incense drift in on special days, so visitors felt the divine arrive on a perfumed breeze. Whether the mausoleum used such theatrical tricks is unknown, but you can imagine some engineer priest quietly thinking, what if the blessings were draft-assisted? At the heart lies the chamber where the sarcophagi will rest, heavy, simple shapes surrounded by an embroidery of carving. You do not linger on endings, the architects haven't either. They veil the idea gently, as if wrapping winter in late autumn light. A shallow basin sits nearby for libations, milk, honeyed wine, water drawn at dawn. Attendants would pour and tip the vessel so liquid traces the rim and gathers in a low ring that gleams like a second moon. Somewhere, a lyre plucks a minor phrase and then lets it go, so the silence feels tuned rather than empty. Historians still argue whether the burial chamber lay below within the podium or higher, nested behind the colonnade, and whether visitors reached it through straight corridors or by a winding route that carefully staged surprise. The plans we hold in fragments tug us in different directions, and the finished building may have been subtler than any single description. You drift to a niche holding small offerings, wreaths browned by time, tiny clay figures with shy smiles, a handful of carved fruit that fools the eye until you realize the pomegranates never change. On a ledge, a bronze lamp waits for evening, 3 beaks for wicks, each ready to sip oil and turn it into calm fire. A curator of the future would fuss with labels. Here, meaning is worn straight into habit. A child once stood where you stand, watching a parent set down a sprig of rosemary. She copied the motion without knowing why, and was taught later that memory begins with gestures. A priest speaks in Carian and Greek, words braided, blessing, remembrance, passage. He avoids heavy notes, favoring syllables that fade like ripples. You catch no talk of endings, only of continuities, households, seasons, names that cross the night and return with the light. It is easy to see how rulers become symbols in rooms like this, how governance turns poetic once a building has taught your feet to move like a procession. You think, gently, that if modern apartment lobbies did this to people, everyone would behave better in elevators. The artwork courts your attention again. Along one band, a frieze shows a banquet. Reclining figures lift cups while musicians lean into their strings. The faces are not caricatures of joy. They are serenity practiced as an art. A sculptor once told an apprentice, "We are not carving parties, we are carving permission to be at peace." You can almost hear the apprentice scribbling that down as life advice. Another frieze displays chariots arcing like commas across the stone, a foreshadow of the 4-horse group planned for the roof. Horse eyes here are all focus, no fear. Wheels bite into imagined earth. A guard, posted discreetly near a column, smiles when you stare too long. They run forever, he says softly. Good race, no dust. You chuckle, grateful for humor in a house of solemnities. The floor shows subtle inlays, dark stone tracing quiet constellations beneath your path. You place a heel on a star and step again, feeling mildly guilty for walking on something so patient. A guide once joked that the builders installed celestial navigation for visitors who get lost in their thoughts. It lands like a kindness for everyone who arrives with more questions than answers. At the chamber's center, a low platform waits for the final ceremonies. Artisans have polished its top until it mirrors shadows. When a cloud passes outside, the light dims, and a gray ship sails across the surface. A mason taps the corner with one knuckle, testing the ring. He hears what he wants and nods, as content as a baker who knows a loaf is done by scent alone. A final, smaller doorway opens to a service passage, practical, unsentimental. Through it, attendants will bring oil, perfumes, linens, the quiet tools that make reverence sustainable. In a world that notices headlines but lives in margins, this little corridor feels like honesty. Wonders need backrooms, the same way stories need commas. You return the way you came, the space teaching you one more time how to move. At the threshold you glance back, and the chamber seems to exhale, as if pleased that you understood the choreography and did not rush. Outside, workmen heave at ropes, someone shouts for a shim, and a flock of swallows scribbles its own calligraphy against the marble sky. A palace for the dead, yes, but also for the living, who come here to practice remembering without breaking. You step back into the light, and the transition feels like moving from a cathedral to an open-air stage. The outer walls rise around you, their panels alive with carved myths. Sunlight shifts across the marble, catching on the edges of figures so they seem to stir, a trick of shadow and artistry that blurs the line between stone and spirit. The mausoleum is not only architecture, it is scripture written in relief, an encyclopedia of gods, heroes, and symbols whispered into eternity. Fact: ancient accounts describe elaborate sculptural friezes on the mausoleum, including depictions of mythological battles such as the Amazonomachy, Greeks versus Amazons, and the Centauromachy, Lapiths versus Centaurs, both popular themes in Greek art of the classical period. You move closer, your fingers hovering above a panel where Amazons clash with Greek warriors. Horses rear, women arch their backs in defiance, shields collide in frozen thunder. A sculptor has caught the exact instant before a spear finds its mark, suspending tension in marble. You almost expect the figures to exhale. Someone behind you mutters that it looks more like choreography than combat. The gods invented ballet before humans did. Further along, centaurs storm across another frieze. Half men, half horses, their torsos twist with wild energy. One clutches a boulder above his head, ready to hurl it, while another drags a struggling victim toward the trees, etched faintly behind him. You pause, realizing how the sculptors carved not just muscle but emotion, fury in the centaur's brows, terror in the Lapith's eyes. The message is clear: civilization wrestling with chaos, order pitted against instinct. Or maybe you think it's just ancient sculptors proving they could handle six-pack abs on two species at once. Quirky tidbit. Later travelers claimed that one of the friezes might have included local Carian myths woven among the Greek ones. Imagine sneaking your hometown folklore into a monument of international fame. It's like slipping a regional inside joke into the global headlines. Historians can't prove it, but the idea sparkles like a rumor you want to believe. You tilt your head back toward the roofline where statues of gods and guardians watch from above. A lion crouches at a corner, jaw wide in a perpetual roar. The sunlight cuts across its mane, turning marble into fire. Beside it, a group of horsemen advances in parade, their spears angled high, their faces calm as though nothing could break their stride. The entire building feels like a sermon delivered without words, a dialogue between mortals and divine. Historians still argue whether these mythological scenes were meant to flatter Mausolus and Artemisia as living participants in cosmic order, or simply to proclaim the cultural sophistication of Korea. Were they political propaganda in marble or spiritual offerings? The truth, as usual, may lie in both. As you circle, you overhear a sculptor muttering at his apprentice, "No, her hair must fall like water, not rope." The boy scratches his head and says, But water's heavier. The sculptor sighs. Then carve it lighter. You smile at the absurdity that genius often hides in such impossible demands. The imagery pulls you deeper. One panel shows a goddess stretching her hand toward a mortal, her eyes distant yet tender. Another shows a hero straining against the coils of a serpent, his muscles taut with defiance. And another, your favorite, shows a line of dancers with linked hands, their robes fanning out like rippling waves. They seem joyful, a reminder that myth is not only battle but also celebration. A priest passes nearby, trailing incense smoke that curls upward into the carved scenes. For a moment, the figures appear veiled in mist, as if the gods themselves are inhaling the offering. The smell of myrrh and frankincense mingles with marble dust and sea air, turning the worksite into a stage for ritual. You pause at a corner where sunlight spills through scaffolding gaps. The shadows of ropes fall across a frieze of warriors, giving them fresh weapons, new angles, ghostly movement. It is almost as if the building collaborates with time and light to retell its stories each day. A passerby jokes, "If these heroes ever climb down from the wall, we'll all be out of work." The laughter ripples through tired hands, breaking the solemnity. Even amid grandeur, the human need to crack a joke survives like a stubborn weed through pavement. As evening falls, the carvings glow golden, their shadows lengthening until they look like silhouettes marching across the stone. The mausoleum does not just house the memory of Mausolus. It speaks in marble poetry, mixing Greek myths, Carian whispers, and Artemisia's devotion into a single language of gods and men. You feel it deeply. The building itself has begun to tell stories, and you, like everyone who passes, cannot help but listen. By now the mausoleum towers above the harbor, a beacon of white marble visible for miles. You walk along the shoreline at dawn, watching the monument catch the first light. The rising sun sets the columns glowing gold, the statues haloed in fire, the roofline sharp against the sky. Sailors squint from their ships and nudge one another, pointing. Traders arriving from Rhodes, from Athens, from Egypt, all mutter the same thing. I have never seen anything like it. Fact, the mausoleum was quickly recognized by ancient writers as one of the 7 wonders of the world, listed alongside the Great Pyramid and the Hanging Gardens. Its size, artistry, and fusion of cultures set it apart as a marvel worth traveling across seas to witness. You wander into the agora where foreign travelers stand clustered, their voices tumbling over each other as they describe what they saw. A merchant from Cyprus shakes his head. It looks like a palace built for gods, but they tell me it's just a tomb. A philosopher from Athens strokes his beard and sighs. Death itself seems richer here than life in half our cities. You smile. Leave it to philosophers to make sightseeing sound like a funeral sermon. Quirky tidbit. Later sources claimed that some poets and artists coined the word mausoleum while it was still standing, turning Mausolus's name into shorthand for any grand tomb. Imagine being so famous that your gravestone becomes a new dictionary entry. Not many people can pull that off. Well, except maybe the guy who invented sandwich. As you stroll, you catch sight of Artemisia, veiled but radiant, walking beneath the colonnade. She pauses as a delegation from Athens bows deeply, their eyes wide. They whisper among themselves, clearly impressed. Some wonder aloud whether this structure is a warning as much as a tribute. Korea, they think, is no longer a provincial satrapy, but a city that can rival Athens in art and glory. Historians still argue whether the mausoleum's fame spread instantly, or whether its status as a wonder was gradually bestowed by later generations who wove stories around it. What is clear is that the monument's reputation endured for centuries, long after the last scaffolding was pulled down. You walk the perimeter, listening to the chatter of visitors. A sailor jokes, "If that's how they bury their kings, I don't even want to guess what their bathrooms look like." Laughter breaks the awe, but even he cannot take his eyes off the roofline crowned with a colossal chariot. The marble horses rear as though alive, the charioteer steady in his stance. The entire city seems to orbit around the monument as though Halicarnassus has become both stage and shrine. In the marketplace, storytellers begin weaving tales about the tomb. One says that lions on the roof roar at night to guard the city. Another swears the gods themselves descend to admire the reliefs. Children listen with wide eyes, certain the building must contain some secret doorway to Olympus itself. The line between fact and legend blurs, but no one seems to mind. Wonder thrives best when nobody checks the receipts. The harbor fills with gossip. Foreign captains describe how the mausoleum gleams at night, reflecting the moonlight so strongly that it looks like a lantern set upon the earth. It guides us like a lighthouse, one remarks, though the lighthouse of Alexandria hasn't yet been built. The sailors laugh, then argue whether it's a blessing or an omen. You climb a hillside at twilight and look back. The monument glows under the setting sun, its outlines softened, its columns casting shadows that stretch like fingers across the city. From here, Halicarnassus seems transformed, a place not merely of trade and ships, but of permanence, of ambition, of memory carved into stone. The mausoleum has already left the realm of architecture and entered the realm of myth. As night falls, torches line the streets and their flames flicker against the monument's white marble. Travelers gather in taverns, raising cups to the wonder they've just seen. You hear one remark, "When men die, their names fade, but this will outlive us all." His companion grins and replies, "Unless the gods get jealous." And so, beneath the stars, the mausoleum stands, already whispered as one of the great wonders of the world, already immortal in story even as it gleams in fresh marble. You lie back on the hillside, listening to the city hum, and realize the building has become what all monuments secretly desire, a story told by every voice that sees it. Morning returns you to streets that feel tuned to celebration. Under the mausoleum's long shadow, Halicarnassus wakes like a festival that never quite ends. Stalls creak open, shutters bang back, and the first olive oil of the day flashes green in the sun. You slip into the market's braided aisles, where figs sweat sugar, fish gleam like dropped coins, and the air wears a necklace of garlic, mint, and sea salt. A vendor raises a pomegranate and swears it cures melancholy. Another swears his cheese cures everything except bad poetry. You haggle until you realize you've traded half your dignity for a handful of olives and a story worth keeping. Worth it. Fact: Halicarnassus, modern Bodrum, was a major Carian port city with formidable fortifications, a planned urban core under Mausolus, and a stone theater carved into the hillside that still survives in part today. The city's prosperity hinged on its excellent harbor and its role as a crossroads between Anatolia and the Greek world. Past the market, you wander into colonnades where scribes set up their tables, inkwells ready like little black mirrors. A magistrate reads a decree to a semicircle of traders. A boy with ink on his fingers mouths each word a half-second late, learning the shape of the law by mimicry. Nearby, a money changer flips silver staters with the flair of a street magician, testing edges with a bite that's more tradition than necessity. Your purse feels suddenly lighter, coin or confidence, you're not sure which fled first. You climb the city slope to the theater. Stone benches arc like a gray tide, facing a horizon where sea and sky shake hands. Today, a troupe performs a drama with gods in disguise and mortals who never read the fine print on their prophecies. The chorus steps forward and the acoustics do their old elegant trick. Words ripple outward as if the air were plucked like a lyre string. A child giggles 3 tiers up, even that arrives crisp as new linen. The benches are honest rock, no cushions, no mercy, so everyone shifts in synchronized discomfort, a civic dance older than intermissions. Quirky tidbit. Mariners swore the harbor water was so clear on windless mornings that you could count a trireme's nails from the quay and read the worn lettering on lost coins below, one of those traveler's tales that probably got clearer each time wine refilled the cup. Still, you lean over the jetty's edge later and admit, the sea really does look like polished glass. The harbor hums with logistics that would make quartermasters weep with happiness. Shipwrights bend planks over smoking braziers, pinning curves into obedience. Dock workers move in rhythms that look choreographed, heave, pause, swing, set, as amphorae of wine slide down skids into a ship's throat. A customs official keeps a wax tablet and a face that says, "This job created the concept of Q." You hear sailors argue about the quickest route to Cyprus, while a fishmonger tries to sell them a suspiciously enthusiastic octopus. The octopus votes with its legs and departs. The market applauds. Up among the villas, gardens stitch green between white walls. You pass a courtyard where a tutor recites Homer to two sleepy teenagers who would currently trade all of civilization for a nap. Farther on, a gymnasium opens to the breeze. Boys run drills, a trainer claps time, and someone invents the first humble brag by casually lifting a ridiculous stone weight. You circle a fountain where lion-headed spouts breathe water into a basin veined like marble milk. A pair of doves drink as if they've reserved the table. You catch a flash of procession along a broad street, musicians, wreaths, a priest with a calm face, and sandals that have seen more stones than most travelers see sunsets. The line slides by, skirted by children who try to walk solemnly for 3 steps, and then revert to skipping because joy is stronger than choreography. Incense feathers upward and briefly tangles with cooking smoke from a baker's doorway. The city smells like stories, and you breathe in both. Historians still argue whether Mausolus's grand redesign aligned the palace, the agora, and the mausoleum along carefully staged sightlines. Turn this corner, see that vista. Or whether later admirers projected that symmetry onto a plan that was more pragmatic than theatrical. The stones we have tell half the tale. The other half hides in the choreography of streets that no longer run. At noon, the sun climbs to the color of brass. Traders throw awnings over their stalls, shading mountains of dates and ropes of garlic. A woman mends a net with the speed of a bard's tongue, needle flashing like a small, determined fish. Someone jokes that haggling should be an Olympic sport. Someone else says it already is, and the victory wreath is a discount. Laughter travels easily here, trained by narrow lanes to echo without getting lost. On a terrace, you find a painter catching the city's geometry in a handful of lines. The sloped theater, the toothy harbor towers, the mausoleum's stepped crown. He works fast, as if the light is a horse that won't be patient long. His friend steals your attention with a chit of local gossip. Who is importing cedar, who is courting whose favor, who wrote a love poem, and should never, ever do that again. Cities survive on grain, water, timber, and rumor. Rumor is the least necessary and somehow the most abundant. A sailor buys a charm from a street-side shrine, a tiny bronze dolphin meant to escort him home through jealous seas. He taps it once against the key for luck and pockets it like secret ballast. The priest at the shrine smiles the smile of someone who understands that faith can live quite happily beside pragmatism, and both beside habit. You pass a stoa where philosophers debate with the gentle ferocity of cats negotiating a sun patch. One claims virtue is a kind of architecture, another claims architecture is a kind of virtue, a third excuses himself because virtue can wait, but lunch cannot. You approve this prioritization. A baker wave-slices barley loaves from a fresh wheel, and steam rises like a warm idea. In the afternoon, the sea breeze turns the city to silk. Laundry pops on rooftops, bells fuss at tethered goats, a citrus seller sings a tune so catchy you hum it against your will. Even the guards at a gate look relaxed, leaning spears to swap jokes that have probably patrolled this wall for years. From here, you can see the chariot group crowning the mausoleum like punctuation, history's most emphatic exclamation mark. Someone near you murmurs that the horses look ready to step forward and descend into the street. You decide the thought is less alarming if you imagine them politely using the stairs. Toward dusk, the market exhales. Scales fold, shutters clap, amphorae are coaxed into cool rooms. On the quay, families wander for a last look at the horizon. You sit on a low wall and watch Halicarnassus wear its evening like a favored cloak, stitched with voices, hemmed with gulls, embroidered with lamp glow. Above, the mausoleum gathers the day's last light and returns it as a soft, pearly hush. And in that hush, you feel the city at its peak. Not a single moment, but a braided many. Theater laughter still vibrating in the stone, market jokes tucked into pockets, oars resetting for tomorrow, scribes rolling up the law and the day together. Splendor, yes, but also competence, rhythm, a practiced grace that lets thousands of separate lives move like one patient tide around a monument that teaches them to look up without losing sight of where their feet are. Evening drapes itself over the harbor, but the city does not sleep easily. A murmur grows in the streets, rumors of fleets approaching, of banners unfurling across the sea. You walk quickly through the agora, past vendors shuttering their stalls, past children gathered by anxious mothers, until you reach the city walls. There, torches sputter in the breeze, and the silhouettes of soldiers move in steady rhythm. Halicarnassus is bracing for a siege. Fact: Halicarnassus was besieged by Alexander the Great in 334 BCE. Though much of the city suffered destruction, sources suggest the mausoleum itself survived, spared either by respect, luck, or sheer resilience of construction. From your vantage point on the ramparts, you see ships crowding the horizon, their sails blotting out the last orange streaks of sunset. Siege engines creak ashore, towers, ladders, and catapults rolled forward by men shouting in tongues both foreign and familiar. The defenders along the wall murmur prayers under their breath, gripping spears as though those slim shafts could hold back empires. Down in the streets, priests carry torches past houses, whispering blessings, scattering incense so the smoke curls into doorways like protective fingers. Children peer through shutters, wide-eyed, clutching little figurines of gods or heroes. Somewhere, a drummer beats a slow cadence, not for celebration this time, but to steady hands and feet against the tremors of fear. Quirky tidbit. One tale claims that during Alexander's siege, defenders rolled flaming barrels of oil down the hills toward the invaders. It's uncertain whether it truly happened or whether it was just the ancient equivalent of cinematic exaggeration. Either way, you can imagine someone at the time saying, "Well, that escalated quickly." Arrows whistle through the night, striking shields and timber with hollow thuds. Catapults release with a groan, sending stones arcing against the walls, each impact shaking dust loose like sighs from the ancient stones. You duck instinctively as a boulder slams against the rampart, the vibration rippling into your chest. Yet the walls hold, scarred but unbroken. Historians still argue whether Alexander deliberately spared the mausoleum or simply ignored it, focusing on military objectives. Was it respect for its artistry, or just indifference toward tombs when armies demanded his attention? The truth may have vanished with the smoke of that siege. In the heart of the city, the mausoleum looms, serene in the chaos. Torches flicker along its colonnade, and the marble statues catch the firelight, turning into guardians who watch silently as the city struggles below. For citizens fleeing to its shadow, the tomb is not just a resting place but a symbol. If Mausolus still endures here in stone, perhaps Halicarnassus will endure too. You hear a soldier mutter to his companion, "If the gods won't protect us, maybe his tomb will." The other laughs grimly and says, "Then let's stand closer." Even in jest, there's truth. The people draw strength from marble as much as from spears. Through the night, clashes echo, shouts, iron ringing, wood splintering. The harbor smolders as ships burn, casting red light across the waves. Yet dawn comes, and with it a strange calm. Smoke curls upward, birds circle uncertainly, and the mausoleum still gleams, untouched, a giant that refuses to bow. Walking back through the city, you step over broken shields, past walls cracked but standing. The air smells of ash and salt, but the monument glows pale in the morning light. Even battered, the city has not surrendered. The mausoleum stands as if mocking war itself, declaring that memory carved in stone is stronger than any catapult. And so, as the survivors gather water, mend nets, and rebuild doors, their eyes lift again to the tomb above. In its shadow, life resumes, fragile but stubborn. The wonder of Halicarnassus has survived yet another trial, its story stitched tighter into legend by the clash of steel and the persistence of stone. The city rebuilds, but the earth beneath it remembers what men forget. One night, long after torches have been snuffed and laughter from taverns has faded, the ground itself begins to stir. You are woken by a sound like thunder locked in stone. Jars rattle, roof beams creak, and the soil under your feet heaves as though some ancient beast has rolled over in its sleep. Fact: earthquakes were common along the Anatolian coast, and it is believed that several quakes over centuries weakened and eventually destroyed the mausoleum, toppling its columns and breaking its statues. You stagger into the street, along with neighbors clutching children, lamps, and hurried prayers. The ground sways like the deck of a ship, stone walls groan, dogs bark madly, and pigeons burst from rooftops, scattering like white shards across the dark. The mausoleum looms in the distance, no longer a silent guardian, but a trembling mountain of marble, its columns swaying ever so slightly in the moonlight. A great crack echoes through the night as a block shifts, tumbling down with a roar. Dust clouds bloom, choking the air. People cry out, some falling to their knees, others staring upward in stunned silence. You grip a column of a nearby portico and feel its tremors humming through your bones. Quirky tidbit. Ancient gossip sometimes painted earthquakes as divine messages. One rumor suggested the gods grew jealous of structures too proud, and so they gave the ground a gentle nudge to remind mortals who really ran the show. If true, the gods in Caria were apparently not fans of architectural overachievers. The shaking subsides, but the silence afterward feels heavier than the quake itself. You walk closer to the mausoleum and see what has changed. Some columns lean like drunks after a long night, one or two cracked through their fluting. A lion statue lies broken on the ground, its once majestic head now staring sideways into the dust. Relief panels are scattered like giant playing cards, faces of gods half buried, horses forever mid-stride in rubble. Historians still argue whether the mausoleum collapsed suddenly in one catastrophic quake, or whether repeated tremors slowly gnawed it down. Was it a single violent night, or the slow erosion of centuries? The stones keep their secret, answering only with silence. Workers gather at dawn, shaking their heads, muttering prayers. Some begin hauling fragments upright, propping them with wooden braces, trying to salvage what they can. But the damage is done. The building is no longer eternal, only mortal in slow motion. Artemisia is long gone, Mausolus long dust, and now their monument begins its own descent into ruin. You overhear a mason sigh, "We build for gods, but the earth is stronger." Another replies, "At least the gods didn't send rain." A third chuckles darkly, "Give them time." Even in loss, humor clings stubbornly, like ivy to broken walls. Through the day, aftershocks ripple. Dust sifts down from high joints. Ropes creak as scaffolds strain against warped weight. You walk cautiously, stepping over fragments, a hand clutching a broken spear, a face serene even as its body lies elsewhere, a fragment of inscription worn too faint to read. Each piece is a ghost, whispering of the whole that once was. By twilight, the mausoleum still stands, but less proudly. Its crown is crooked, its steps jagged, its chariot atop the roof tilting slightly, as though weary from holding its pose against the ages. Yet even broken, it dwarfs every building around it. Sailors in the harbor still stare, still whisper, still call it a wonder. Perhaps that is the true miracle. Even wounded, it commands awe. You lie awake that night, listening to the ground groan softly, like a giant shifting under blankets of stone. The mausoleum has survived armies, sieges, and jealous rivals, but against the patient, rolling hand of the earth, it can only endure until it cannot. And so you drift to sleep uneasy, knowing that even wonders tremble when the ground remembers. Morning finds you tracing the hairline cracks left by the last tremor, but time begins to lengthen and the ruin learns to live with itself. Months fold into years, years thicken into generations. The mausoleum bleaches under hard suns, drinks sea salt on winter winds, and sheds carvings the way old trees shed bark. Columns lean a fraction more each season, lions lose their perches, relief blocks slip from the walls and doze beneath weeds. You walk the terraces like a caretaker no one hired, noticing how rain discovers seams and patiently teaches them to open. Wonders do not disappear in a fit, they fade with the manners of old nobility, bowing to the centuries as they go. News travels differently now, by rumor, by the shanties of sailors, by the dry scratch of a monk's quill. The great tomb remains a landmark, then becomes a quarry of memories, then simply a high place of beautiful rubble. People are practical. Stones that once spoke theology start speaking carpentry. One spring you meet a mason hauling a fluted drum on a sled toward the shore. "A fine corner," he says, patting the marble. He does not mean a doorway to the afterlife. He means a fortress. Fact: in the early 15th century, the Knights Hospitaller raised the castle of St. Peter at Bodrum and reused stone from the mausoleum. Travelers recorded ancient reliefs set into the new walls, and even Latin notes carved on blocks to mark them as taken from the mausoleum. You follow the ruts to the promontory where timbers climb above the bay. The castle grows course by course, the sea throwing up white lace against the rocks as if applauding each layer. A carved horse's flank becomes part of a parapet. A column drum lies horizontal as a cannon platform. A headless goddess, once mid-procession, is mortared into a bastion. Defended by iron, she now defends with her silence. The knights bless the stones, they bless everything. But a few mutter that a tomb spirit prefers stillness to battlements. The foreman shrugs and tightens the rope. History, like a good rope, holds more than one knot. Quirky tidbit. Later visitors whispered that a lion from the mausoleum kept watch above the castle gate, and sailors tipped their caps to it for luck, half courtesy, half superstition. Whether a single lion truly served as gate mascot or was merely an especially judgmental block in the wall remains a romantic mystery. In the lanes below, villagers trade olive oil for rope and gossip for bread. A slab with faint folds of drapery props a garden terrace. Two boys play knucklebones on a fragment that once belonged to a god's cloak. Their laughter counts the throws like a metronome training time to move on. You wince, then forgive the moment. The world must live somewhere. Sometimes it lives on top of yesterday's art. A farmer, asked about the oddly perfect step in his courtyard, shrugs. It was lying there, and my doorway was tired. Practicality has always been the patron saint of renovation. Centuries wheel past with their usual indifference, and scholars begin to arrive, carefully, curiously, sometimes pompously, carrying notebooks and optimism. They measure what lies above ground, sketch what lies below, and argue about what refuses to be either. You kneel beside them, dust rising like old perfume as brushes lift soil from a carved sandal. The sandal's going nowhere. The minds that study it will travel continents. A draftsman tries to capture the wave of a lion's mane and admits it looks like an accident that keeps happening perfectly. Historians still argue whether the burial chamber lay beneath the podium in a vaulted crypt or higher, nearer the heart of the colonnaded level, and whether later intruders disturbed it long before a modern spade could. Was there a hidden passage, a thief's tunnel, a priest's door that no one has found? The uncertainties multiply, polite as guests who do not plan to leave. Then, in the 19th century, the hill fills with a new kind of bustle, ropes and derricks, packing straw, careful labels tied with string. The air tastes of chalk and anticipation. A diplomat-turned-archaeologist steps between trenches with measured stride, pausing as though waiting for the earth to finish a sentence. Wooden crates carp their complaints as men ease heavy fragments inside. Horse hooves, a flying fold of drapery, a lion's paw the size of a helm, a torso whose ribs are a hymn to breath held forever. Somebody invents an inventory system and immediately regrets it when the second cart arrives. Fact, because the record matters. In the 1850s, Charles Thomas Newton directed excavations at Halicarnassus and shipped numerous fragments of the mausoleum, reliefs, column drums, lions, and large portrait statues believed to be Mausolus and Artemisia, to London, where they entered the British Museum's collections. You watch the packing as if constellations were being coaxed into new skies. Dockworkers blink at the cargo, history's least ergonomic luggage, and swear softly when the manifest insists on proper Latin plurals. A sailor claims the statues will get seasick and turn greener than old bronze. "They're marble," the mate says. "Let them try." Laughter helps the ropes hold. The ship slides out. Gulls escort it like noisy footnotes. The harbor steps back into its own reflection. Across water, the fragments begin a second life under colder weather and softer light. In galleries, curators stand 3 paces back and tilt their heads in the international posture of reverence. Students learn to say cornice and cavetto without smudging the syllables. Children press noses to glass and leave perfect fog circles on the centuries. Somewhere, a guard gently scolds a visitor for trying to pat a lion, then confesses he has wanted to pat it for years. You sympathize. If anyone has earned a head rub, it is a lion that once roof-walked the sky. Not every piece sails so far. Some remain in Bodrum, stored in cool rooms, shown in local halls, or set into the castle walls where gulls add footnotes no editor can remove. Others drift into private collections, wandering from mantle to mantle until families forget who first declared a weathered block to be from the wondrous tomb. Provenance becomes a story told with the confidence of recipes and, unlike recipes, never subjected to a taste test. You kneel beside a lion in a museum and listen in the way that looks silly until you hear it. The quarried mountain still whispering its arithmetic, how much weight it bore, how much wind it learned, how many sunsets it kept in the ledger of its mane. The label beside it is polite, earnest, and brief. The stone is impolite in its vastness. You stand with the feeling that you have borrowed someone else's time and spent it gladly. Quirky Tidbit, Archival Edition. Victorian families sometimes commissioned plaster casts of favorite fragments to display at home, an early form of souvenir that turned parlors into polite jungles of white lions and heroic elbows. Dinner guests learned to nod gravely at a cornice as if it had just delivered a punchline. Debates gather like weather fronts. Whose history is it to hold? Where should the fragments live to be most themselves, beneath the sky that first bleached them, or in rooms that promise shelter from the next impatient century? Historians still argue whether objects speak most truth in their birthplace or in a chorus with other civilizations. The questions are earnest, the answers arrive on slow feet. Meanwhile, schoolchildren lean close, tourists blink away dust that is not there, and the fragments do what fragments do. They endure by suggestion, summoning the whole in absentia like a choir humming the missing melody. Toward evening, you climb the old hill. Grass has claimed what geometry released. Lizards patrol warm stones with proprietary airs. A shepherd lets his flock browse along the ridge while he watches the harbor tinsel itself with late light. In the distance, the castle stands, part crusader, part carrion, part everything that fell within reach of a mason's eye and a strong back. You sit, and the wind arranges your thoughts the way a curator arranges a room. Not quite forever, but well enough for now. The wonder is gone and not gone. Its pieces have traveled, its name has become a common noun, its outline survives in conjecture and in the muscle memory of anyone who has climbed scaffolds in any century. You think of artisans whose hands no one remembers, of a queen and a satrap whose likenesses now teach schoolkids what patience looks like in profile. Somewhere a lion keeps watch over a stair. Somewhere else, a relief survives as a rumor of how fabric once fell. The echo inside stone is not noise, it is invitation. And you, last visitor of the day, touch a chipped block warm from the sun and feel an entire building rise through your palm. It's the strangest thing. Even scattered, the mausoleum still knows how to stand. Language has a way of carrying stones in its pockets. After the lions, the friezes, and the shattered drums, what keeps walking is a single word. You stand on the ridge at dusk and hear it in the wind that combs the grasses. Mausoleum, Mausolus's house, made plural by time, borrowed by cities you have never seen. The building fractured, the syllables multiplied. The shift begins quietly. Travelers write letters, poets polish flattering lines, and builders, never shy about good branding, adopt the name as if it were a seal of excellence. Soon you can stand anywhere around the Mediterranean and point toward some proud tomb and hear people say, half whispering, half boasting, a mausoleum. A king's name becomes a blueprint that fits other rulers. That's influence. That's ancient architecture going viral before the share button. Fact. The word mausoleum comes from the Greek mausoleon, the tomb of Mausolus at Halicarnassus. By the Roman era, it had become a generic term for monumental tombs, hence the Mausoleum of Augustus, begun 28 BCE, and later Hadrian's Mausoleum, the great stone drum now known as Castel San Angelo. You stroll through centuries the way a curator strolls through galleries. In Rome's Campus Martius, Augustus raises an earthen-cored cylinder faced in stone, a ring so vast it turns emperors into neighbors beneath one circle of memory. Hadrian follows, spanning the Tiber with a bridge that escorts mourners like a marble usher. His tomb trades its funerary post for a fortress and keeps the name anyway. The word remains, serene as a title that outlives its owner. The habit skips frontiers. In Central Asia and Persia, domed tombs unfurl like stone tents. The label may switch tongues, but the intention, honor wrapped in permanence, travels well. Far to the east, a white vision rises by the Yamuna, its symmetry so calm it sounds like a lullaby when you say it. Call it by its proper name or call it a mausoleum. The idea and the word recognize each other on sight, like old friends meeting in a new city. Quirky tidbit. In the 19th century's garden cemeteries, families sometimes picnicked among ornate mausoleums, treating the grounds like parks with better stonework. If you've ever shared a sandwich while leaning against a Corinthian pilaster, congratulations, you've participated in a very polite haunting. The term keeps collecting meanings. In one capital, a blocky monument of crimson stone receives visitors who file past in hush. In another, a Victorian hillside lines up vaults along avenues named for trees. In a port city built on marsh, above-ground family tombs lift the departed into streets of marble houses. Everywhere, the word carries a faint echo of Halicarnassus, even where no one says the satrap's name aloud. Language is a patient smuggler. You test the syllables on your tongue, Mausoleum, and feel how the vowels move like a slow procession. The final lands softly, as if the word itself removes its sandals at the threshold. Maybe that's why it stuck. The sound behaves the way the building intends you to behave. Or maybe it's simpler. Maybe people just liked wearing a famous name. Humans are great at turning proper nouns into common ones. Ask anyone named Hoover, Xerox, or Google. Mausolus, unlikely patron saint of linguistics, might be amused to learn he became the Kleenex of tombs. Not every adoption is grand. Municipal records in a dozen tongues apply the term to modest family vaults with more love than budget. A tiny hill town calls its brick cube a mausoleum with the seriousness of a knight dubbing a wooden sword. And why not? Reverence at any scale is still reverence. A good word is a ladder that doesn't ask how tall you are. You pause beside a caretaker who polishes a bronze handle that is opened on 3 centuries of Sundays. He jokes that he's trying to make the past reflect better. You tell him that's everyone's job, and he laughs the laugh people use when a truth sneaks in disguised as a quip. A visitor nearby murmurs the word under their breath and gets the stress slightly wrong. The caretaker shrugs. Pronunciation is negotiable, respect is not. Between us, even autocorrect has given up on this one. The word gathers neighboring terms like a tide gathers boats, crypt, columbarium, cenotaph. You learn the differences the way travelers learn train platforms, not because you must, but because accuracy is its own small respect. A cenotaph honors the absent, a mausoleum houses the present absence, a columbarium keeps ashes in walls that look like organized beehives for memories. Somewhere, an architect is probably sketching all 3 into one calm garden and calling it multi-use. You roll your eyes, then admit the brochure would be excellent. Historians still argue whether the title went generic early in the Hellenistic age or hardened into everyday usage under Rome's habit of collecting names alongside provinces. Did Mausolean spread because tourists needed a handy label, or because patrons asked architects for one of those Halicarnassus things, but with our family crest? The paperwork is fragmentary. The phenomenon is not. Either way, the word learned to travel better than stone. And travel it did. It crossed languages, alphabets, and faiths, sometimes wearing domes, sometimes pyramids, sometimes the clean geometry of a modern cube. It could be lyrical in marble or stubborn in brick. It could be perfumed with incense or humming with air conditioning. Whatever the costume, the script stayed the same. Build a house for memory and teach the living how to walk through it. You wander back to the ridge and look down at the shoreline. The castle still paces the water with its borrowed muscles. Somewhere far away, a museum lion drowses beneath a climate-controlled moon. And everywhere, from capitals to small towns, the letters wait like a doorframe. Mausoleum. The word opens gently, insists on quiet, and invites you to practice remembering without breaking. If the original monument taught anything, it might be this: names are scaffolds. They let us climb high enough to see what we mean. The lions are long dispersed, the friezes fragmented, the chariot lost to time's traffic, but the word remains at its post, pointing softly toward threshold after threshold, guiding steps, lowering voices, and with a small smile, reminding us that even in language, stone can still stand. And if you happen to bring lunch, well, Wipe the crumbs. The ancients would appreciate the tidiness. The hill is quiet now, its grasses bending under the same sea winds that once carried the scent of marble dust. You walk slowly among stones that no longer stand in columns, but lie scattered like chess pieces after a long forgotten game. The harbor below still glitters, ships still come and go, and the city hums with life. But the mausoleum itself exists more in memory than in stone. Fact: by the Middle Ages, travelers described the mausoleum as partly ruined, its stones reused, its sculptures scattered. Yet its fame endured in texts, lists, and legends, ensuring it remained celebrated as one of the seven wonders long after its collapse. A lizard darts across a broken block, pausing on the carved hem of a goddess's robe. Grass pushes through seams, unbothered by once sacred geometry. You pause by a fragment of fluting, imagining the column it belonged to, how it once shouldered the weight of a roof crowned with horses charging toward the sky. The fragment is small enough to fit in your arms, yet it carries the echo of an empire. Quirky tidbit: early European tourists in the Ottoman era sometimes sketched the ruins with exaggerated grandeur, adding extra columns or tidying collapsed stones, because even imagination wanted to repair what the earth had shaken down. If only Photoshop had existed in the 1600s, those travelers would have been masters of the before and after. You walk higher up the slope, where the outline of the platform still clings faintly to the ground. Here, the air feels heavy, as if grief still lingers. But it is not grief that cuts, it is grief that softens. Mausolus and Artemisia are long gone, but their devotion survives in every language that calls a tomb a mausoleum. Their monument may be scattered, but their names are stitched into the world's vocabulary. Historians still argue whether Artemisia built the tomb more for love than for politics, whether the artisans created it to honor the satrap or to surpass their rivals. The debates circle endlessly, but perhaps they miss the simpler truth. Memory itself needs a house. And here, once, a house rose so high it became a wonder. The sun begins to sink. The ruins glow in copper light, their shadows stretching like fingers toward the harbor. Children chase each other along broken walls, their laughter as eternal as any stone. A shepherd whistles to his flock. A fisherman pulls in his nets. Life has folded itself around the memory, carrying it gently forward. You sit on a block that once might have stood inside a sacred chamber. The stone is warm against your hand. For a moment, if you close your eyes, you can almost hear the chisels again, the chants of workers, the hum of ropes, the voice of a queen whispering orders softened by grief. The mausoleum is gone, but it is also here, layered into the earth, the language, the very idea of what it means to remember with stone. The evening hush gathers around you now. The last light slides over the harbor, soft as spilled honey, and the ruins fade into silhouettes that look more like dreams than fragments. The air cools, the cicadas quiet. Even the gulls surrender their cries to the slow rhythm of the tide. You let your breathing match that rhythm, steady, patient, timeless. In your mind's eye, the mausoleum still stands. Columns rise smooth and white, reliefs flicker with the shadows of myths, lions keep watch at the corners, and a marble chariot glitters at the crown. You walk again through its corridors, hearing faint footsteps that may be yours, may be centuries old. Each breath you take seems to stir the dust of history, gentle, harmless, like opening a book that has waited too long. The story softens now, fading from chisels and quarried stone into the calm certainty that memory does not vanish, it transforms. The mausoleum has become a word, a lesson, a quiet reminder that love and ambition, when carved deeply enough, can echo for thousands of years. And just as the tide erases footprints but never ceases, so too the world carries memory forward, reshaped but alive. So you rest here at the edge of history, the sea's hush folding around you like a blanket. The ruins no longer ask questions, they simply are. And that is enough. Your eyelids grow heavier. Your breath steadies. The night has no hurry. The mausoleum at Halicarnassus still whispers across centuries, and tonight it whispers you towards sleep. The end. Sweet dreams.